Now I'm just checking that everyone can hear us okay. Maybe a thumbs up. Awesome, thank you, David. And now everyone can see the screen properly. Awesome. We're recording it, so yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, awesome. Hello everyone and welcome to this fabulous event. My name is Nick, he, they, and I'm an advisor for equity, diversity and inclusion here at Sturt University. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today, the Wiradjuri people, and pay respects to elders past and present and all First Nations people joining us today. We acknowledge the many cultures that live on this land and we collectively respect the land, its past and present stories for our future generations to enjoy. It's also important to pay tribute to those LGBTQ trailblazers that have paved the rainbow path we continue to walk on today. Your courage, determination and resilience is so inspiring and must be remembered. Today is International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, Biphobia and Intersexphobia. And it's been marked annually since 1990 to mark the declassification of homosexuality as a mental health disorder by the World Health Organization. It's important for LGBTQ communities and their allies to unite in support of the recognition of human rights for all, irrespective of sex characteristics, sexuality, gender identity, or gender expression. I wanted to take just a few moments to talk about the university's work in the LGBTQ space. So the Ally Network began in 2014, made up of trained, visible and active allies in the Sturt community. Over the years, the network has grown and evolved into a strong, autonomous and independent network and advisory group to the university on LGBTQ inclusion. We have introduced a leadership structure with dedicated co-convener roles. And through this leadership, the network has made an outstanding contribution to positive cultural change regarding equity, diversity and inclusion within Sturt and our communities. There's also been a significant improvement with student engagement with 2 student co-convener positions, resulting in 25% from 0% previously of current allies being students. The network has introduced campus leads and champion positions to further embed LGBTQ inclusion across the university footprint. This is significant work worthy of recognition because the network is facilitated by a voluntary group of staff and students. Most notably, Sturt was awarded a bronze employee in the Australian Workplace Equality Index following progress made since 2019, which was largely driven by the network. We still have a long way to go and we recognise this, but by participating in the Australian Workplace Equality Index, we ensure best practice in the LGBTQ space and can identify areas for improvement. I'd like to give a shout out to everyone involved in bringing today's IDAHOBIT celebrations together, and especially to the Sturt Ally Network co-conveners, champions, campus leads, and each of our 270 plus allies. I'd like to quickly read a statement by Professor Megan Smith, Executive Dean of the Faculty of Science and Health, who is unable to join us today. I'm speaking as Megan, just FYI. I was like, I would like to welcome Dr. Alex Bond to Sturt and to thank him for his presentation today. I'd like to give my apologies for not being able to join you in person due to a pre-existing commitment on another campus. My thanks to Dr. Maggie Watson for inviting me to be involved, and Nick Steve, that's me, for his support in preparing this statement to read to you today. As the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Science and Health, I support the need to actively engage in initiatives to increase and ensure inclusion in STEM. Diverse ideas, opinions, worldviews, cultures, knowledges, and understanding are essential to generating the best solutions to our scientific problems. However, as much as we might recognise and value the strength that diversity brings, the current STEM environment is not one where open diversity and inclusion has been achieved to the levels we would like it to be. There's still a great deal of work to be done to create safe and inclusive environments for LGBTIQA+ people in STEM in Australia. Research shows that LGBTIQA+ people still struggle to openly be themselves in workplaces and within STEM. LGBTIQA+ people have lower retention rates, and students are more likely to withdraw from university than their heterosexual and cisgendered peers. This is attributable to poor visibility of LGBTIQA+ professionals in STEM and a lack of support for policies, management guidance, and career resources tailored to the needs of LGBTIQA+ employees. To remove barriers to LGBTIQA+ people reaching their full potential in STEM, we must strive to promote visibility, celebrate diversity, and encourage allies and workplaces to build safe and supportive cultures. Here at Charles Sturt, we have successfully achieved our SAGE, Science in Australia Gender Equity, Athena Swan Bronze Award, and we are now working towards our Signet Awards and ultimately our Silver application, reflecting our initiatives and outcomes in gender equity, diversity, and inclusion. I look forward to hearing Alex's perspectives and recommendations and the response from those of you attending today on what more we can do at Charles Sturt to promote and support diversity. Cheers, Megan. I will now hand over to Dr. Alex Bond to present Hidden Diversity in STEM, Queers in a Scientific Context.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry for the title change. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Thanks to Nick for organising all of this. Thanks to Maggie for the invite. And thanks to everyone watching on Zoom, at home, wherever you may be, and here in the room. It's a great pleasure to be back at Charles Sturt. This is not my first time here, and I enjoy it absolutely every time. So I think there's a mix of queer folks, which I will use as sort of a catch-all term, and allies or straight folks here as well. So there should be a little bit of something for everyone. Some of it, I'm going to warn you, will be uncomfortable, and I'm hoping that we can work through that together. So just before we start,
make sure it's recording.
It definitely is recording.
Yeah, definitely recording.
It.
Excellent. Right, there we go. Quiz time. All right. Because what's a university lecture without a little pop quiz? So don't answer aloud, but just have a think and see if you know the answer to some of these questions. When did male same-sex acts stop becoming a capital crime, so that's punishable by death in Australia? Have a think about that. Give you a minute. And you can give yourself 2 points if you get the state. 1949. Yeah, 1949. That's not that long ago. Right, question number 2. When was it legalized? So not capital offense. That was put to death. 1949 in Vic. When was it actually legalized across the country? Who was the last state to do it and when? 97 in Tassie. Oh, 1997. You know, that's 25 years ago. You know, there are undergraduates that will have been through that system. And then sort of lastly, equal age of consent. So this basically means that it's not a crime regardless of the age of consent. Basically for sexual acts is the same for straight folks as it is for queer folks. When was it equalized? And where? Answers on postcard, please.
Holy crap.
2016. 2016.
Good old Queensland.
In Queensland. So the point about this is that I'm not talking about ancient history. You know, I'm 38 years old, 39 years old. Gosh, that snuck up fast. 39 years old. I'm from Canada originally. I was a profoundly uncool child. I just want to convey that. So that's me in probably about 1989 and about 1994. And I like to think that I've improved a little bit along those lines. But in Canada, we had not quite the same level of legal barriers that we have here in Tassie or in Australia. So in Canada, same-sex acts were legalized in 1969, which was fortunately long before I was born. And what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of a mix about how I went from that profoundly uncool child with aviators before they were cool, you know, to the queer scientist that I am today, working at the Natural History Museum in London. And that was that top picture. I realized I didn't have a picture of me with a rainbow flag in the field. As a field scientist, that was profoundly disturbing. So that's from Lord Howe Island just a couple of weeks ago. Right, so growing up, and for many of you in Australia who are part of the LGBT community, you'll be aware of this. This is Elsie Wayne. She was a Canadian Member of Parliament for the Conservative Party in the early 90s. One of those profound vocal critics against same-sex marriage, which was our ongoing debate in the 90s and early 2000s. She was also a family friend of my grandparents. I danced with her at my aunt's wedding. And today we've got Twitter. If you want to doom scroll, you just log on and you can see all sorts of terrible things. In my day, when I was growing up, we had the op-ed section of the newspaper. And so we get our newspaper every morning. The Telegraph Journal was the provincial paper. And this was the question of the day in 21st of June, 2003. Why do you oppose gay marriage? And it discriminates against the right of the straight community in Canada to their cultured, time-honored heritage. Oh, bless. Amazing. It denies every child in Canada the right to a father, mother, parenthood. That is just absolute bollocks. The sight of two men kissing and even talking about sex, because that's all we do, is repulsive to me, and I can't help it. It's just the way God made me. Utter, complete bullshit. And in the 90s, there were quite a few defining moments if you grew up as a queer kid in North America. In Canada in particular, this is Delman Reid. He worked for a college in Alberta, in Edmonton, and he was fired for being queer. And he took his case to the Supreme Court of Canada, and in 1997, they enshrined equal employment protection in the Constitution, which meant you could not be fired for being LGBTQ+. South of the border, the first sort of mainstream pickup on really the stuff that we face every day was the murder of Matthew Shepard. He was a 21-year-old college kid tied to a fence, beaten to death in the town of Laramie, Wyoming. It was turned into an incredible play by Moises Kaufman and Tectonic Theatre Project. And then, of course, 2005, Canada approves gay marriage across the country. So that was, fortunately, 17 years ago now. And today, so this is an example of an email that a friend of mine sent from another institution, shall remain nameless. They put out a call for seminar speakers, and they said in their sort of opening paragraph, we want to avoid having a mammal, a panel of nothing but white men every week of the year. We're over that. We've done that to death. So please suggest individuals from diverse backgrounds. And this was the response from one of her straight male colleagues. Isn't it the individual and not the group that should be the only ethical and moral consideration to be had? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because otherwise, by implication, it would mean that there's a white, patriarchal, heterosexual, oppressive plot in place at this institution. Yes, brother, speak. And that has been operating until now to keep all non-white, non-male, non-straights out of the seminar series. And surely, if that's not a crime going against policy, we should, take it to HR, perhaps even the police. This is the response when we say, can we just have a crumb at the, from the table? And we run a thing called LGBTQ STEM Day, which is a day every year to celebrate queer folks in STEM. And of course, it's a hashtag, trends, and this is the stuff you get. This is the op-ed section from today. So, yet another useless dumbass holiday. Maybe y'all can find a cure for AIDS. I know a great guy working on that in Georgia, queer as fuck. And then, so I posted this for Museum Selfie Day. I've got two fantastically gorgeous birds there. There's a Gouldian finch and a painted bunting. And someone, it's a classy sexualized ornithology. If you're interested in signing up for my course in sexualized ornithology, it'll be open semester 2 next year. And this is the day-to-day. The classic cartoon. You must hide your genitals. No, not like that. We need to be able to infer what your genitals are from the clothing that you wear. Absolutely crazy. And for us, it's the little things. So I get asked, as I have on this trip, I have been out publicly for about 17 years. What does your wife do? I don't have a wife. Or checking into a hotel. Oh, we'll put you in a room with 2 single beds. Okay. Oh, thank you very much. That's very helpful. And even everything down to things like song lyrics. Listen to a song on the radio, and if it's about any sort of romantic relationship, 99% of the time, it's going to be a heterosexual relationship. Trying, even 10 years ago, trying to find wedding cards, birthday cards, anything that didn't fit that cis-het norm was really challenging. And then it's the things like, is it safe to hold hands? We'll talk about this in a minute. And you're regularly in a new situation that may be uncomfortable, watching the crowd and finding, right, there's a way I can get out if I need to. And the thing with these is that each on their own, they don't hurt as individual things, but it's the cumulative impact and the fact that they do still hurt in some way. So this is a report from the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, which looked at the map that you see here. Do you avoid holding hands in public with a same-sex partner for fear of being assaulted, threatened, or harassed? And you can see at the top, Romania, 79%, 80% of queer folks. UK, 37%. That's not insignificant. That's a third of same-sex couples saying, I will not hold my partner's hand in public. And if you're a straight person or in a heterosexual opposite-sex relationship, you don't even think about that. You never think that, oh, if I'm just going to, walking to campus, just give my partner a peck on the cheek as we part ways at the car. Absolutely not. There's the EU average, there's the UK. Or if you have actually experienced harassment, in the UK, the average is, the total average is 56%. More than half of queer folks have experienced harassment in some way in the last 12 months. But it's also the big things. This is the British Social Attitudes Survey, which started in the early 80s and asked the same series of questions to a cohort over time to basically track social attitudes in the country. And this is the question: sexual relations between two adults of the same sex are not wrong at all. And you can see it goes from a low in the early 80s. We had a very, very homophobic Don't Die of AIDS campaign in the 80s that really did not do anyone any favors. Right up to when we legalized marriage in the UK in 2013. And you can see, it's on a steady upwards climb, but it's still less than 70%. That's a third of Britons. There's 65 million. A third say sexual relations between two adults of the same sex are wrong in some way. A third. That's the environment in which we find ourselves. And it's all, the bigger thing. So queer people are high risk of mental health challenges, greater occurrence of depression, hello, more often likely to have suicidal thoughts, self-harm 4 times as likely, alcohol and drug abuse, twice as likely to be assaulted, experience harassment, discriminatory remarks. And I pulled some stats. I don't have them for Australia, so I apologize. But I pulled some stats for the UK. These are hate crime reports based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And some of that will be reporting bias in the early years, but there's also a great reluctance to report these to law enforcement because they literally don't care. And this is the trend that we're seeing. And that's not a good thing. Right, on to something more cheery, plastic pollution. I don't often get to say that. So, this is a flesh-footed shearwater on Lord Howe Island that we dissected a few years ago. And you can see all the plastic that we find in the stomach. This is the basis for the research program that we have at the Adrift Lab. There we go. This is a seabird stomach. You can see the outline of the bottle cap. And there I am with my collaborator and very good friend, Jennifer Labers from the University of Tasmania, and we're picking pieces out. So when people say, what do you do in the field? I literally make shearwaters vomit bottle caps. And so how did this part of the journey start for me? Well, it actually started on a Qantas flight, ironically enough. It was 2009. I was just coming to the end of my PhD, and I went down to visit Jen in Hobart. And she said, you've got to come out to this amazing place called Lord Howe Island, and you've got to see the birds and you've got to see what the problem is with the plastic. So we got on the plane in Sydney. It's a little Dash 8, Lord Howe's shortest runway in the Southern Hemisphere, like the place where they put the parking brake on and rev the engines and then just drop it and you take off. 14 kilo bag limit, you know, the works, ridiculously expensive. And so you get a meal, free meal. It's a 2-hour flight. And what you can see here is we've got a plastic container of water with a plastic lid with a separate plastic cup, plastic cutlery wrapped in plastic, a plastic sandwich bag, in a plastic clamshell package with a very delicious plastic wrapped cookie. Oh, and the Toblerone bar. And we see this and we just have a think, being the scientists that we are. Let's not give this back to the flight attendant. Let's just take it to the one-hour flight. How much is actually there? 55.5 grams. That's pretty chunky. And that's all single use. None of that is ever reused. And that's per person. So we can do a little bit of quick math. 40 people on a flight. 9 flights a week. This is a science school, right? Show your workings. Just over 2 tons a year. 2 tons of plastic designed literally to be used for less than a minute. For you to unwrap your sandwich, eat it, and then give it back. And that's it. That is it. Now, I'm not saying plastics are bad. Plastics, we cannot live without them. The problem is what we do with them when we're done with them. Plastics were originally sort of invented for a very good reason, to stop killing elephants. Because we would be making billiard balls and piano keys out of ivory. So what they wanted, there was a competition, and that basically came up with Bakelite, which was the first sort of synthetic polymer used for billiard balls. And now plastic is not just one thing. It is so many different things. Acrylics, polyesters, silicones, polyurethanes, halogenated plastic, you know, you name it. And if you look at the bottom of any of your fancy, you know, whatever bits of plastic, and you see that number in the recycle symbol, that tells you what polymer is. It tells you what it's made of. So one is PET, polyethylene tetraphthalate. That's like your drink bottles. 2 is high density polyethylene. That's your more rigid plastics. 4 is low density. That's sort of your more wobbly plastics. And then there's this lovely 7, which is just everything else. Literally everything else. It can be, you know, cling film, toothbrush bristles, you know, ABS pipes used in pipeworks, keyboards, printers, fat television, polycarbonate. I put CDs. Does anyone have CDs? CDs are made of polycarbonate. Glasses, people wearing glasses here. All different things. And they interact and are chemically quite different. And I love this quote. This is from Haiti Tate, who runs Tangaroa Blue Foundation. So if you ever want to do a beach cleanup, do a beach cleanup, send your data into Tangaroa Blue. They coordinate this cross Australia program tracking marine debris. Because plastic doesn't break down, it just breaks up. Every bit of plastic that's ever been made in the world today is still here in some form. And each piece on their own isn't fatal. You've got plastic in you right now, I can guarantee it. But you're not dead, hopefully. But they can still hurt. One of the earliest papers looking at plastic pollution in birds was from the 1960s. Really great paper by Carl Kenyon and Gene Cridler from US Fish and Wildlife Service. And they reported plastic ingestion in albatross chicks on Midway Atoll, which is sort of in the northwestern end of Hawaii. It's a fantastic picture that shows, you know, an albatross stomach degrading on the ground, lots of pumice, lots of plastic in it. This is 1960s. And the great thing is when Carl Kenyon passed away, and this is a guy who I've been reading his papers for years. You know, this is his obituary in the AUK. I just happened to mention his companion of 39 years, Clarence Larson. That for me, that was really, really cool. So if we take Carl and Jean's number down there, about 3/4 of the birds on Midway had plastic in them. And if you run that through sort of the numbers that were collected in the interim, right up to when we were there in 2012, every albatross has plastic in it. Every single one. Absolutely no exceptions. And we can see these same pictures. These are from Chris Jordan, an amazing wildlife photographer. And you can see, whole identifiable objects in there. So what we've been trying to do in the Drift Lab is try and understand the sublethal side of things. Because if how we traditionally look at the effects of plastic pollution is a whale is washed up and has plastic in its stomach, mistaken for jellyfish. Or beach birds have shown up and there's plastic in their stomachs. But if someone asks you, hey, how you doing? And your two options are alive and dead, doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room. So we've been trying to look at those sublethal impacts. So we took a bunch of blood samples. This is from a flesh-footed shearwater, and basically sent them off essentially to like a vet company and did a blood screening. And so we can see birds with plastic present had lower blood calcium. These are chicks growing, so blood calcium is really important. They had higher cholesterol, lower body mass, shorter wings, shorter bills. And all this presence absence, that means it just takes one piece, that's all it took to be put in that category. And if you look at some of the more continuous measures against the number of pieces or the mass, things like uric acid, which is involved in metabolism of nitrogen. The more plastics you have, the more uric acid you have. Now, we have no idea what this actually means yet for the birds. We can't ask them how they're doing and they can't tell us. We can try and interrogate this using the data that we have, but plastics do not do anything good unless they're inside a seabird. We know that much. This is a really amazing place. This is the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the UK overseas territory of Pitcairn, and in particular that black dot is Henderson Island. Henderson Island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a 43 square kilometer raised coral atoll, which means all that greenery, it's got a coral rubble. There's no soil, it's all coral. It's amazing, brilliant place. There's our research ship there on the distance. Lush green vegetation, lots of amazing birds. And the next slide didn't show up. In 1991, there were no plastics on the beach whatsoever. And when we went back there in 2015, there were 38 million pieces weighing 18 tons. It's 5,000 kilometers from anywhere. You think, how on earth can this possibly be? And with Steph Burrell, who's in New Zealand, and a bunch of us, we looked at international policy. So what you see in the blue line is plastic production. That's annual production. We're making 350 to 380 million tons of new plastic every year. And the gray line is CO2 emissions, we'll be more familiar with. And if you look at the gray boxes on top, these are the big international environmental agreements. You've got the Rio Earth Summit in '92, Kyoto '97, which was, let's have some targets, but not make them binding. And then you had Paris Agreement in 2015, which was actually binding targets. And if you transfer that to the plastic space, we had MARPOL in 1978, which basically said you can't dump stuff at sea, with a lot of asterisks about what you could dump and where you could dump it. All the way up to these other, the Honolulu Strategy, Clean Seas, none of those are binding at all. Just recently, since this paper came out, just last year, there was talk of a first international plastics treaty. That's basically where we were in 1992 with climate. And look where we are with climate and how much more we need to do. We're 30 years behind that in the policy side from plastics. So people often ask, right, what can we do? What can we, let's all recycle. That's such a small drop in the bucket. Because once plastics get into the ocean, they travel the world. You can't stop plastic pollution by using carrier bags or by taking your keep cup to the coffee shop. That'll reduce the amount of plastic. But really, it's those leaks and waste management streams that we need to worry about. And it's through international cooperation and political engagement that we're going to see those changes happen, because they are far beyond the individual level. The UN has these, you may be familiar with them, Sustainable Development Goals, in particular number 14, which is life below water, which seeks to reduce pollution in the oceans. These are being renegotiated for what they're going to look like in 2030 and 2035. And just like every international environmental agreement, they'll be toothless, they won't be able to be measured, and will be basically essentially where we are right now. So it's the little things that add up, right? This has been the theme of the day. So during this talk, 300,000 new plastic items have entered the oceans across the world. More than 90% of those are from consumer products, and many of those will be designed literally just to be used once and then never used again. And keep in mind, these are fossil fuels. That's what goes into plastics. They're petroleum products. Constantly checking products for the amount of plastic, and what's recycled and where can this go, and that's really tiring and exhausting. So how do we marry these two themes together? This is the concept called queering science, which I was introduced to about 5 or 6 years ago by Max LeBaron at Memorial University in Newfoundland. There was a TV show on in North America called Queer as Folk. This is a play off the logo that my friend Kevin Bergio made. It may not make sense in your cultural context. If so, I apologize, but I absolutely adore it. So what? Queer science, it's all inclusive, it's angry, political, and is full with unapologetic agendas. We're scientists, we're people, we are not completely objective, nor should we be, I would argue. The thing about queer science is it doesn't just go to the moon, it insists that any people with any kinds of bodies can dream of being astronauts and it'll pay for them to get there. Stop science for being for the polite and only for the good kids, quote unquote, and make science radical, loud, and interrupted. This is how we take that queer theory and apply it to the science that we do. Those are quotes from what's called the Queer Science Manifesto, which was written by 3 amazing researchers. It celebrates collaboration and community over individualism and ego. It fights for a more just world. There's a link, Google Queer Science Manifesto, and this will show up. Brian, Carolyn, and Aaron Mudd did an amazing job putting this together. And it's something that has just guided our research and how we approach everything from co-authorship to papers, who we work with, how we mentor our students and postdocs and early career researchers, which collaborators we work with, where we work, what questions we ask. And we're able to do that because we can bring our whole, true, authentic selves to the workplace. And not everyone is quite so lucky. So in the UK, the Institute of Physics, Royal Society of Chemistry, and Royal Astronomical Society did a survey of the climate, workplace climate, amongst the physical sciences, so chemistry, physics, astronomy. 28% of queer respondents considered leaving their jobs. This is in the last year. A fifth of trans respondents, and that compares to 16% of their heterosexual counterparts. Who are you out to? Bi or pan folks, only out 14% of them in the workplace. Queer questioning, 21%. Lesbian, 38%. Even gay men, the most privileged of the rainbow flavored people. Only 44% of them are out of the workplace. So 20% had experienced exclusionary behavior. Almost that many felt the policies were generally lacking at the institutional level. Half agreed there was a lack of awareness of queer issues in the workplace. 40% working outside academia didn't have access to a workplace network. You're really lucky here at CSU. You've got a really great staff network, ally network. If you're outside academia, those systems don't really exist in the same way as they do in universities. And as we all know, most of our students that we might see passing through, they're not going to go to academia, right? If they're going to continue in STEM, they're going to be in industry, consulting, whatever, outside of the ivory tower. And then this lovely article that came out in 2021 looked at the more broader systematic inequalities. This is from a survey of about 30,000 LGBTQ scientists, mostly in the US, who had fewer career opportunities, fewer resources, were less comfortable whistleblowing in the workplace compared with their straight counterparts. They felt more devalued professionally, which is something that I think the pandemic is only going to exacerbate, as we all feel the pinch of what the last 2.5 years have done to us. And they're more likely to be socially excluded. Think about, where does science happen? Often, certainly in the UK, it happens, in the pub after work. Not everyone can do that. And, for a lot of queer folks, that's not an environment where they feel particularly comfortable or indeed safe. 20% of them experience harassment in some way. This is in the last 12 months. Greater incidence of minor health problems, insomnia, stress from work, and depressive symptoms. And this isn't rocket science. This is broadly reflecting society as a whole. But in STEM, it's taken us, we have to quantify the obvious here in order to get the point across. And part of the big reason that I'm here today is because really visibility and representation matter a heck of a lot. When I was an undergraduate, a master's student, and a PhD student, so that's 10 years of post-secondary education, I've met one other queer person in STEM. One. And they were a visiting prof from University of California, Berkeley, that came to give a visiting talk. One person. By the time I finished my first two postdocs, I met another one person who worked at the university 4 hours away. That just wasn't even in my realm of understanding. So at LGBTQ STEM, which is an organization that I run with Izzy Jayasinghe to promote and encourage queer folks in science, technology, engineering, and maths, we run a one-day event called the LGBTQ Seminar. It's a science conference, cross-disciplinary, anything in STEM talks for queer folks. And the emphasis is on the science. And we get feedback every year. And it's literally just like this. The last 2 years we've been online, but before that we were in person, and we would get 250 people, at our annual conference. The last one, I've got a bit, this is a friend of mine who works in optics. From Ireland. I've got to say, I got a bit choked up when I walked in and saw this massive rainbow. We were at the Institute of Physics, the most iconic building for professional physics in the UK. And on their big giant TV screen in the entryway, there was an inclusive pride flag. It would overwhelm me to walk into a room and feel so immediately validated and welcome. So much of what we do in STEM is ego and combative and competitive. Whether it's internal competition for money or for resources or for students, or externally with grants and publications. But in the queer science world, no, everyone is in it for everyone else. And this is an amazing quote that somebody said to one of the organizers. It's like, do you remember the first time you saw a queer person really owning it? And it gave you the confidence to be yourself. And if you're a queer person in STEM, you will be that person to someone. And that's just so incredibly powerful. One of the things that a lot of my straight colleagues don't really think about is safety. You go on an international field trip, boom, I can't go to 70 countries in the world. Because that's where being gay is literally illegal, much like it was in Australia until 1949. And so in the UK, this is a particular problem because we have a lot of international field courses that go to places in sub-Saharan Africa, overseas campuses in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. And most of these laws you see here, the sort of orange, red, and darker colors, are remnants of British colonialism. Victorian era colonists coming in and said, oh no, yes, no, you should have to do that. And of course not, they're behaving properly. And those laws remain today. So when we think about safety in the field, you run an international field course, which I'm sure happens at CSU, as it does in many other universities. If you can't answer me right now, how do you get a queer student who's been arrested out of the country safely? You're not ready to run an international field course. Because whether you know it or not, you're going to have LGBTQ+ students in your classes, and that is a real thing. That is a real thing. When you overlay that with the map of IP addresses that visit the LGBTQ STEM blog, where we have interviews and a blog from other LGBTQ scientists, of the sort of 200,000 views and 88,000 visitors, about 1% of those are from countries where being LGBTQ+ is literally illegal. And you say, oh, it's just 1%. Yeah, but what's 1% of 88,000? You know, that's how we need to start shifting how we think. We're so used to thinking about populations and averages, when in reality, it's the individual that really matters. This is a message that I got literally 2 weeks ago. I'm an Afghan LGBT and left behind interpreter, currently live in fear because of the Taliban. Yeah, can you help? That's incredibly confronting. How do you deal with this? If you don't have an answer, you need to think about that. And this one from just a couple of years ago. You know, this is the reality that queer folks face. This just isn't in STEM. I mean, I get these because I shout on Twitter about all sorts of crazy things. But I'm not alone in receiving these sorts of messages. So queer leadership, and I literally just don't mean in science. If you're queer folk here, you're a leader instantly because you're here, and there's someone who isn't, and you're going to probably know them, or they might know you, and you might not even know it yet. And just this has been my mantra from not quite day one, but certainly, you know, the early single digits. You know, be the person you wish you had. I didn't have a queer mentor as a student, undergraduate, graduate, postdoc. I didn't have anyone that I could go to and say, there's this conference that I really want to go to, but it's in Ghana. How do I navigate that? And you know, I had some great mentors as a grad student and postdoc, but they just have no concept. That is just so outside of the realm of things that they might even have to consider. Not gonna lie, it's bloody exhausting. You know, to have this constant thought in the background of everything, so much that's subconscious for so many people is at the fore of what we think of. And I'll preface this by saying, this is my experience. I am but one cisgendered white male. This is my experience. There are going to be folks that have it way worse than I do, and there are going to be folks that have it way better than I do. So I'm not saying this is the be all and end all. But it's bloody exhausting doing it. Right, so what does the future have in store? Is this happy time? Things are trending to the positive. As we saw earlier, I will no longer be put to death in your lovely country. But there are going to be lags and dips, and stuff is going to go backwards because that's the political cycle in which we find ourselves 3-4 years. It's important to not just call out the bad, because there's a lot of bad, but also build the good, because it's the good that's going to see you through. It's the good that's going to get you through those tough times. And it's a lot easier and quicker to do that when you have a supportive, inclusive, diverse community doing it. Despite that, challenges remain. This came out literally last week, the Rainbow Europe Report. And I'm including it here because often for queer stuff, the UK has this weird centrally role, and stuff that happens there eventually percolates out. And I've seen this in New Zealand, in the US, in Canada, and in Australia. In 2021, mainstream newspapers, of which we've got about 5, ran 1 or more anti-trans articles every day of 2021. You could go into the 5 major dailies and find some anti-trans article. That's rubbish. The UK slipped from number 1 in 2015 to number 14 in Europe in their sort of safety and cultural social rankings. We decided it was a great idea to start sending refugees to Rwanda. I think we got that one from you guys, though. Rwanda, it is literally illegal to be gay in Rwanda. But that's okay, that risk is justified, says our Home Office. We had our speech from the throne. You guys were very excited about it. I could watch it on the ABC, which starts our parliamentary session. And number 10, which is the Prime Minister's office, clarified that our gay conversion therapy ban will not be banned under the new conversion therapy ban. If you're over 18, you can still consent to torture, folks. Great news. Lovely. Amazing. It's utter crap.
That was a week ago.
That literally was a week ago. Literally a week ago. I watched that from a hotel in Sydney. That's ridiculous. So there's some allies here. I don't believe that. The ally is not a thing. We don't need allies. Allyship is not a permanent fixed feature. You can engage in allyship, but you can't give yourself that title. And really, we don't want allies going, hey, good job, go queers. No. We don't want folks cheering from the sidelines. We need co-conspirators who are going to get in, get down, get dirty, and get, in some cases, hurt with us. The biggest thing that I could suggest for allies in the audience is to strive for object permanence. As soon as the queer folks leave the room, we're out of thought. No one considers it because we're not there to say, oh, hey, don't forget about us. We lack that object permanence. So when you're thinking about, where to go, courses, events, policies, if it's a group of cis straight folks and you're not considering, oh, gee, I wonder how this might impact LGBTQ folks who work or study with us. If you're not doing that, we haven't obtained object permanence. There's a small number of us, we can't be everywhere at once. And also, it's really exhausting because then we have that additional sort of committee, meeting, representative burden because, oh, we need a token queer. And I'll end with 2 quotes, which I listened to. These were on various podcasts that I listened to when I flew down from the UK. This is Egyptian author Ala al-Aswani. He said, you realize that you must live with injustice, and injustice is such a terrible thing to live with. That's the first thing, because in our lifetimes, the world will remain unjust in some way. And Emma Lazarus, the US poet from the 19th century, until we are all free, we are none of us free. This is not just queer folks shouting. In Adrift, we have a saying that good science happens because of good people. This is part of our queer science approach. All the science, all the quotes, everything you saw came from these amazing folks from all over the world. And I couldn't have done it without any of them. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Someone's raised their hand.
Rav, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. I actually have about 3 questions. Firstly, can you name a transgender asexual scientist? Secondly, can you What's being done for inclusion of gender affirmation leave within the scientific world? The second question, what can the science do to prove the environmental sustainability of building gender neutral toilets?
Right. Okay. So to take your answer, yes, I know at least 2 ace transgender scientists who've been to our seminar in the UK. They do in fact exist. Your second question was on parental or leave around gender affirmation. I mean, that comes down to institutional level, you know, and we're still lagging behind on things like parental leave, which are much more ingrained. A colleague of mine at University of Redacted is straight. His wife is due to give birth in 6 days. He cannot be the primary caregiver. He gets 3 weeks leave. That is it. That's in Australia. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, it should be a thing. How that's organized, whether that's done at the institutional level or whether that's mandated nationally, it should be done in the same way that we currently do with things like parental or long-term sickness leave, however that is managed. And gender neutral toilets, I mean, we all need to use the toilet. I don't think there's too much of a concern about sustainability issues. But I'm happy to be corrected on that. It's not something that I'm following terribly closely, but if someone's pulling out a sustainability argument, I would question why. Does that answer all of your questions?
Yeah. The reason look, I've only come across a couple, and their arguments against gender neutral toilets are usually coming from transphobes, but essentially they sometimes tend to use the environment to say, oh, it's not environmentally sustainable to, you know, include gender neutral toilets because of all the wastage, and it's like, what?
Yeah, that's a big WTF for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You okay, press up chat?
Yeah, cool. There we go. Brilliant. Yeah, other questions?
I noticed that in the presentation, only 14% of bisexual individuals were out in the workplace. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on bisexual erasure.
Oh yeah, massive, absolutely. Because as soon as you're in an opposite sex relationship, you're assumed to be straight, which is a massive problem. And I think it's something that is increasing in sort of broader awareness that might have been ignored for a very long time. But it means, you know, that identity is no less valid. I'm not biased. I don't know. I've never experienced that. Some of my closest friends are bi. No, but seriously, you know, it's a thing, because so much of how we perceive each other is based on just visual cues. Who are you with? What are you wearing? I've got shoes with rainbow laces and a rainbow seabird, you know, spread on my jumper. And when somebody instantly fits that heteronormative mold, that's where you go. So yeah, no, it's absolutely a massive problem. So the fact that bi folks were less likely to be out at work, I think that, you know, fits exactly in with that.
Just a little thing. Sorry, this morning on the national news that a young footballer had come out as gay.
Yes.
In the UK.
Yes. Our first one in 30 years.
It's lovely, but I was thinking, good Lord, you know, how slow is this? And that this is national news.
Yeah. And you know, he's like 19 or something like that. So for those who hadn't heard, we had the first out Premier League footballer in the UK. Jack Daniel for, I think, for Liverpool, possibly. I can't remember. He was the first publicly out professional, like, Premier League footballer in the UK since Justin Fanshawe 30 years ago, who tragically died from HIV and AIDS. Yeah, the fact that, you know, you look across all the sports leagues, whether it's Ice hockey North America, Major League Baseball, professional football, rugby league. They are there because we are everywhere. And that's not meant to be like a sort of insidious, no, we are normal, just like everybody else. Queer folks play sports. It happens. But yeah, exactly. The fact that it is literally front page news, puts the marker for where we are. Absolutely.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
Do you have a relationship with Queers in Science in Australia?
I do. I hosted one of them in London about 4 years ago. Somebody from the Melbourne branch. But yeah, so there's a consortium of us that run LGBTQ STEM Day, and they're one of them.
Yeah, great. Because they're a kind of new group that started, I think, a couple of years ago.
Absolutely.
For anyone who doesn't know, queersinscience.org.au is the Australian version. The other question is, as scientists, data is really important. So where do you kind of stand on collecting information around sexual orientation, gender identity, and kind of sex characteristics?
I think it's really important. It's something that we don't do.
Yeah.
If you go to and I've had these discussions most recently with the UK House of Commons Select Committee on Science and Technology. Someone says, right, what can we do? You've got to prove that there's a problem, and you can't do that without numbers. So we're not collecting data on sexual identity or orientation or gender identity in grant applications or in hiring, because you can't look and say, you're a woman, you're disabled. It's not a visible characteristic, it's an invisible. That's why the talk is titled Hidden Identities. It's because if you pass somebody walking down the street, rainbows aside, very unlikely that you would know what their gender identity or sexual orientation is. You can infer a lot from appearance, gender, and some physical disabilities. But because we are in that invisible space, most of the sort of workplace action plans or initiatives or anything just completely, no, that's too hard. We're going to put that in the too hard box, and they don't come back to it.
But it is, I guess, a fine line between how you ask that in a sensitive way as an institution. There is obviously pushback from certain parts.
Yeah.
But there is also from the community, as in, why are you asking this about me, and why should I tell you that?
Yeah, no, and there's a trust thing there, absolutely, because you think, oh, could that potentially be used against me? So it's got to be voluntary, first of all.
Good, thank you.
And it's got to be changeable. So personal story time. I came out in 2005 as gay. Whereas today I identify more in the queer, gay spectrum area of things. So I don't want that big giant G label following me for the rest of my professional life. People who go through gender affirmation surgery need to be able to change the gender that's recorded in professional systems. Journals are getting more and more behind that now. So I'm the editor of a very small bird journal, Avian Conservation and Ecology. And now if somebody undergoes gender affirmation surgery and changes their name, or indeed if someone gets married and changes their name, or changes their name for whatever reason, we can change the name on those publications after the fact. So we can go back and say, right, you're no longer whatever, you are now your name. And it can be for whatever reason. We just need some government document that has your name, or a letter, or proof that you've been engaging in that name professionally, because sometimes we don't publish under our full names. That's absolutely fine. So I think we're getting there in terms of how we deal with those things. But yeah, no, the lack of data is always flagged up as an issue. But the thing with the data is that it will always be an underestimate.
Of course.
And that's what has to be communicated to the higher ups who make the decisions. Any other questions from online? Or from in the room? I'm going to hang around for a bit, so if you don't want to shout in front of everybody, come up and chat. I'm happy to chat. Maggie and Nick have my contact information, so by all means, drop me a line. And yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. It's been a great pleasure. Thanks so much.
Coast University LA Network. We'd like to give you some rainbow bling.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
And, when you
It's like the Olympics.
Don't play the music.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Very good.
Yeah.